we recently had a listener of this program sent an email asking about how they had heard that some of these extraterrestrial civilizations were quote unquote, bad or hostile or worrisome. And this is, of course, part of the mythology that is the stock and trade of retail, pop culture, UFO conferences and videos and mass media. And I want to analyze this a little bit, and if you can bear with me, it's going to be a very interesting deep intelligence analysis going back about 55 years. If you go to the Disclosure Project, or disclosureproject.org, and Disclosure Project's all one word, .org, you will see a whole lot of very in-depth testimony and information, and some of it comes from people who had worked with the covert Star Wars initiative that was going on prior to Ronald Reagan's SDI, or Strategic Defense Initiative, and all the way back into the 50s and 60s. And we learned over the course of the last 18 years in the research we've done that they have launched a false flag operation of deliberate disinformation since 1953 that has been designed explicitly to affect policymakers, military personnel, and the public through the media to raise up a threat from outer space which does not exist. The reason for this is that if we are ever to have peace on this planet, the $1 trillion per year military-industrial complex wouldn't have anyone else to fight. So they have to have a boogeyman. And the boogeyman that they have been creating very subtly through disinformation, false cases, all kinds of spin through the UFO subculture is that there is one or more hostile alien races that we have to, that are a threat that we have to defend against and fight. Of course, by raising this whole question, it hits all the hot buttons that humans have in their sort of primitive midbrain of fight or flight response to the unknown, the reaction that humans typically have to a different race or a different culture, or and this is, of course, the genesis of prejudice on the planet, is that there is a tendency that is tracked biologically and neurobiologically to self-preservation, to be wary of otherness and differentness. And this has been exploited, of course, by racists and by misogynists and people who have pitted one ethnic group over another, et cetera, and so on. And it can be used by demagogues of all types and stripes and colors, whether it's religious or an economic system or a political system or a tribe or a race, to amass a power and control the masses. The ultimate trump card, the ultimate card to play in that regard, would be able to create a worldwide, military-oriented, unified planet that is focused against a supposed hostile alien threat. And this has been part of a psychological warfare. Now, I'm quoting from a CIA document that's in our Disclosure Project materials, a psychological warfare use of the UFO subject. And we have a number of people on our team who have worked those programs and who have been involved with them for over many, many decades. And this is why when you go to say a UFO conference, or turn on the History Channel, or turn on anything that is in the movie Independence Day is a good example, what you see are these horrifying and terrifying images of alien races, and that there are good ones, which happen to look like Caucasians from Sweden or something, and then there are the bad ones who look funny. And if they're playing on this tendency humans have towards fear of the unknown and otherness and towards tribalism and, frankly, racism. But they're trying to expand it into interplanetary racism. And this has been done through a very careful analysis and setting up social studies that they did back through the Rand Corporation and others way back in the 50s and 60s that concluded that there could be a great deal of power that would amass to this cabal of military and industrial interests that have been keeping this information secret by presenting a threat out there and hoaxing a threat. And that if they could do it quietly with some of our policymakers around the world and various world governments, they could get a lot of money for a covert weaponization of space to target these extraterrestrial vehicles and get a great deal of lucrative contracts for the contracting sector. For the masses of people, it's the beginning of a propaganda war of convincing people there's a threat when there is absolutely no evidence that there is one. So I think that, with that information, what you begin to do as you analyze and begin to deconstruct the last 55 years of UFO disinformation that's out there, is you find that there's only really one group that would continue to benefit from this kind of false flag event and false flag information, and that is the same folks who've been keeping this secret all along. And what you find, therefore, is that there are huge vested interests in creating another enemy that's out there, quote unquote, and to replace the enemies of various nations and various ethnic and tribal enmities and fights that have been going on for hundreds and thousands of years on this planet. And that this is part of what has been very carefully planned out over the years. Now, I want to remind the listeners that back in 1997, when we were doing briefings for members of Congress and for the Pentagon and White House on this, we had one of our top secret witnesses had been in a project that was an interagency council and coordinating committee that were going to use man-made anti-gravity craft, what were called alien reproduction vehicles, or ARVs, and also biological forms, things that look like aliens but are actually man-made, what are called programmed life forms, to stage an attack on the planet that would fool everyone. I mean, anyone who isn't really deep clearance on this would be completely tricked by this false flag operation, and that they had been testing it on the public for a number of years through what the public have heard and what's been come to be known as the abduction syndrome, which most people think is actually extraterrestrials abducting humans. What it actually is alien reproduction vehicles using these man-made looking, these creatures that look alien, but they're not, and using a lot of chemical warfare as well as electromagnetic systems to make people unconscious or put them in an altered state of awareness and abduct them and make it look like it was ETs that did it. Now, I have met with more than a dozen different people who have been on the inside of those programs who don't know each other, who have corroborated what I'm just saying. But what is not being reported out to the public is that this is all a big hoax, that about 90% of everything that deals with kind of pop culture or retail UFO studies is a type of disinformation designed to sow the seeds of fear. Now, a lot of people find this more bizarre, and it is often true that the truth is stranger than fiction, and this is one case where that is very, very much the case, because you have extraordinary technologies and biological developments that have been put into play over the last 50 years to lay the foundation of propaganda, and also not just amongst the masses and through the mainstream media, which is are often shills or pimping for this cabal, but also some of our leaders, like Ronald Reagan, was completely deceived on this issue, as was President Gorbachev. And so there have been large programs that have been going on now for decades that have supported a militaristic approach to the extraterrestrial issue, because not that there is a threat out there, but because it's incredibly lucrative if they can convince people there is one, just like it was very lucrative to convince people there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq when it was well known that there were none, and that, but, you can, spend about $1 trillion on an unnecessary war if you can get enough people stampeding around like, frightened cattle, and stampede into something as foolish as the misadventure in Iraq. So I think that this is exactly what's being done, and the New Age community and the UFO subculture have been completely deceived on this, to the extent that the dominant paradigm out there is that there are good ETs and bad ETs, and the whole sort of false dialectic and this sort of cosmic duality, where it's, in my opinion, an anthropocentric projection of our own conflicts on Earth into space, because it fits with our own experience as humans, where we have tribalistically, attacked and murdered each other in endless wars and conflicts since the beginning of human history. So I think that this is something we have to be extremely careful of as we go into the future, and as we begin to entertain what kind of world are we going to have. Is it going to be this weird Orwellian and brave new world of manipulated information, where the psychology of fear becomes so virally contagious that people stampede into another something much worse than the Iraq War, but that would be interplanetary in nature? Or are we going to sit back, analyze the data carefully, and begin to ask the really hard questions, such as, who benefits from an us versus them, good alien, bad alien mythology? Who benefits from this kind of disinformation? Why would it be done? And when you look at it very carefully, you realize that there are vast and very powerful centralized groups that will benefit from a militaristic approach to an extraterrestrial presence.